This is the North Mobile Post radio show, and I am your host, David Merrill. In today's news, last night was the Republican National Convention's last night. Former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney accepted the party's nomination. I'm going to have some more opinions and analysis of his speech in a bit, but first I want to run through the other headlines. And another big story, the remnants of Isaac continued to pound Louisiana with heavy rain for a third day. Nearly half the state's residents are without power, thousands are still in shelters, and over 500 people had to be rescued by boats or high water vehicles. The New Orleans was largely spared, but the rest of the state took a big hit from these floodwaters. And in other news, the Pentagon is threatening to sue the former Navy SEAL who has a book out on the Osama bin Laden raid. It's not out. The book is due out September 11th, but I believe they pushed it up now to September 4th. And they are suing the SEAL because he signed non-disclosure agreements, and there's certain things you can't reveal when you get out of the military, especially when you're on these covert missions. And the SEAL, who under the pen name Mark Owen, had his identity released by Fox News, and he has now had threats against his life by several, shall we say, bad characters overseas. And in a final bit of news, federal court rejected Texas's voter ID law. They plan to appeal, of course, but this could have big ramifications for the coming election, as these laws are thought to be not beneficial to President Obama, as many minorities and elderly who might have voted for Obama will not get a chance to, and that is the general line of thought, is that he would be more affected by this than Governor Romney would. Now I want to circle back and talk about Mitt Romney's speech. I thought it was a good speech, not a great speech. He did what he needed to do, and that seems to be the prevailing thought by most people. Mitt Romney's not a great speaker. Steve Schmidt on MSNBC, he was the former senior campaign advisor for John McCain when he ran for president. He said it's the best speech Mitt Romney has ever given, but he said it wasn't the best speech at the convention, and I'm guessing he thought Paul Ryan's was, and I would tend to agree with that. On Fox News, they kind of said it was a workmanlike performance, and Chuck Todd called it optimistic nostalgia, because he talked a lot about looking back, on better days America's had. And I thought he was most effective, when he talked about the bad economy, how it's been under President Obama, and how it would be, better under him, and how America's better days are ahead of them. And he talked about American exceptionalism. That's where he was at his strength, just talking broadly and generally about American exceptionalism. That plays well with, people that don't keep up with politics a lot. For the hardcores, the people that are, watching the news every day and, watching the campaign speeches and all that, that kind of stuff doesn't resonate as well. But for the guys and gals who don't, look into this every day, these kind of broad speeches talking about how great America is, they work. And he clearly made a big play for women in this speech. He had a lot of mentions about women. I thought one of his best parts was when he talked about his mom and her Senate run. And that kind of coincides with Paul Ryan, who I thought also one of his top moments was when he spoke of his mom. And clearly, they know when they see the polls, just like everyone else does, that he is trailing badly with women, especially single women. And he also mentioned, that his cabinet, when he was governor of Massachusetts, he had a lot of women in the cabinet. And he hired a lot of women at Bain, and he talked about how most small businesses now are opened by women. So big play there. He's clearly trying to narrow that margin with President Obama. Some of the negative moments in the speech, I thought, was when he mocked President Obama for saying after he got elected that he was, it was on climate change. He said, President Obama said that, he's going to try to stop the rising sea levels. And that got a lot of laughs in the convention hall and applause. And Chris Hayes on MSNBC, I thought he had a good point. he said, Republicans are on the wrong side of history there. We're going through the hottest summer on record. Food prices are skyrocketing worldwide because of the droughts we have in the Midwest right now, killing our corn crops. So to attack the president on trying to fight global warming and climate change, I think it's a bad move. That's something Republicans really got to start looking forward on. They can't keep trying to deny science and climate change. It's just a bad move. The other possible bad point was when he made, now I don't even know if this is necessarily what he meant. I'm sure he's going to deny it now, but it kind of seemed that way when he made it. He made a comment about, like, when we need big things done, we need an American on the job. And a lot of people were saying afterwards they thought that was a kind of birther shot, saying, kind of implying that President Obama was not born in America. And, he made that joke recently on the campaign trail talking about, nobody questions that I was born in this state, because he was in Michigan where he was born. And that's just not good. That's not a good way to go. Obama is still liked personally across this country. He has much higher favorability ratings than Mitt Romney. And when you attack him like that, people, I think that birther stuff, it was not very popular. Only, with the extremes. Moderates, independents, they just look at that as nonsense, and it doesn't make you look good. So I think that's stuff they need to stay away from. And like I said, overall, a good, not a great speech. He didn't hurt himself at all. I think he definitely looked presidential. He did what he needed to do. I look at it, it was like a par putt. He didn't birdie, he didn't bogey, it was a par, right down the middle. And and looking at him now, at everything we've seen from him so far, I think Mitt Romney is most comparable to a George Bush or a John Kerry. He's campaigning in the primaries. He had to go real hard to the right to win it, because the Republican base, those are the people who turn out to vote in primaries, and they're very conservative right now. They have shifted far to the right, so he had to go right to win it. But overall, I think this is a moderate guy, very much like George. And when I say George Bush, I mean George Bush, George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, not George W. Bush. Just a moderate guy, Northeast guy. And John Kerry, same thing. These are guys, though, that, and another reason I say they're comparable, not just because they were moderates. Kerry was more liberal, really, than moderate, but these are guys that just don't, they're not gonna blow the roof off the hall when they speak. And Romney didn't. He got some good applause lines, as any nominee would, but he's not going to excite people like that. He's not Ronald Reagan. He's not Bill Clinton. He's not even Barack Obama in that regard. And he doesn't have to be, though. With the economy, it's not bad, I would say now. It's not good, but it's not, it's growing. But America's not where it wants to be right now. And so he doesn't have to be a rock star, but he has to convince people that he can get the job done. And one thing, this speech was not big on details, and it, not really expected to be. It's an acceptance speech. He gave his 5-point plan, which was very broad and generic. One of the things I don't like is when they talk about repealing Obamacare, repeal and replace. I mean, either repeal or just repeal and replace. Repeal is bad because, like I said, don't say you're going to get rid of it and just go back to the status quo, because that's completely unsustainable. And if you're going to say repeal and replace, you need to say what you're going to replace it with. And thus far, we haven't got a lot of details on what he's going to replace it with, and we didn't get it in this speech. Like I said, not totally expected in this speech, not a lot of details. So I give him a pass there. But let's see, the most memorable lines from this convention. That's the next thing I want to talk about. I thought the two most memorable lines was Romney had one tonight where he said, it's bad when the most exciting moment about a candidate is when you voted for him. He's speaking, of course, about President Obama. And, of course, I would kind of disagree with that. I would not say the most exciting moment of Obama's presidency would be voting for him. If you're a fan of Obama, of course, the signing of the health care law, and if you like Obamacare, that would be a much bigger highlight than voting for him. And I should think everybody's biggest highlight, if not that, even if you don't agree with Obama, the biggest highlight should be the killing of Osama bin Laden, which happened under his watch. And the other big line was, and you're going to be hearing this all the way through the election, was Paul Ryan's line about 20-year-olds coming back home from college and living in the room they grew up in, looking up at faded Obama posters. You already hear that making the rounds in conservative circles on conservative TV and radio. That's a big line. That's something that is definitely going to stick. So again, I think Romney did what he had to do. He hit his par putt. Now we move on. The next, we're going to campaign for a bit, and the next big thing is going to be the debates. And that's where I think this election will possibly be decided, unless the economy takes a turn for the better or worse from this point. If we stay steady right here, we're looking at a tight race, which we have right now. But if the economy, if we get a month of 200,000 plus jobs created, or a couple of months like that going forward, Obama's chances increase, and I think he'll win. If we have sub 100,000 jobs created per month going forward, Obama's going to be history. And the price of gas, too, is going to be crucial. If the price of gas stays over $3.50, closing in on $4 all the way through, he's in trouble. Obama's in trouble. If it starts to go down, if it's going down closer to the election, he'll stand a much better chance. There were some other speakers at the event. Jeb Bush did something no one else at the convention would do, and that is defend his brother, President George W. Bush. He stated that Obama needed to, take responsibility for his presidency and stop blaming George W. Bush. And, George W. Bush has been notoriously absent from this convention. He's still very unpopular, and Republicans were not in any mood to bring him up. Marco Rubio also spoke. I thought he did a good job, talked about his family history. I really liked his little story about his parents, how they, worked a bunch of jobs, and they never made it rich, though. He said, they never made it rich, but they provided a better life for him and his family. So I thought that was a good story. And, of course, the other major headline from the event has to be the Clint Eastwood appearance. It was a very bizarre appearance, and it was trending big on Twitter afterwards. He did not seem himself. I know he's 82 years old, but, he's been in movies recently, and he performs pretty well, so it wasn't a performance anxiety issue or nothing like that, but he was stuttering and stammering, and it started to get bizarre. He was talking to an empty chair like President Obama was sitting in it, and he was acting like the president was cursing at him with some very inflammatory language, I might add. So that was very strange, and you're probably going to see a lot of that on the news, especially cable news, the next few days. And that is not good for Mitt Romney, because, of course, they want coverage to be centered on Romney's speech and Ryan's speech and, all that. And now they're going to be talking about this. And, of course, Eastwood, I don't know if it was last minute, but he was a surprise guest, a special surprise guest. So that kind of backfired, I think, because that is definitely going to be talked about a lot in the coming days, that unusual speech he did. That's about it for this show. Next week, we will have the Democratic National Convention, and, of course, I'll have coverage of that, talk about it after each day. And tune in tomorrow. We'll have more headlines, more opinions, and more news.